Hey everybody, thanks so much for hopping on. My name is Andre Shulgach. I am really excited to be here talking to you all today, and specifically about the audio side. I come from the audio side of the game industry, and I'll get into a little bit of my background in a second, but really happy to be here. So, a bit about me. I've been making games professionally for 11 years, unprofessionally for 18. I've been coming to IGDA and local events and conventions since 2013. In my career, I have handled sound design, music production, and implementation, all different types of roles in audio, over 50 projects across films and games. Some of the notable projects that I worked on are things that you might have heard of are King of Fighters All-Star, the fighting game, Red vs. Blue series, Man at Arms, the YouTube channel, as well as the Nerd Out YouTube channel, Rooster Teeth's Block Party, CEO Gaming, if you're familiar with fighting game esports tournaments. I was writing music for that tournament, as well as the hit Fallout fan film, Deadweight. And for anybody that is familiar with Legends of Learning, the edtech company in DC, I was a technical designer there, as well as UI UX and music and composition. So in games overall, I worked as a technical designer, UI UX, programming, composer, sound designer, you name it, done the whole indie generalist route. Also worked in software development outside of games, including product design for robotics. And I also ran an asset store publisher brand by the name of Slim UI. If you have been on the Unity Asset Store and have searched UI, you've probably seen it. We specialized in high quality UI menu templates that were easy to customize. And as of today, I have not checked the numbers, but I think we're somewhere between 30 and 40,000 downloads. So it's been cool to get a pretty large user base built up over the years. A lot of great feedback coming in. And definitely fueled my passion for visual design, which is still something I do a lot of now. Most recently, co-founded Game Audio Maryland, organization dedicated to being the heartbeat of Maryland's game audio community, pulling together different subgroups in game audio, especially some of the fractured ones since the pandemic kind of separated everybody indefinitely. Even today, we still feel it. We're focused on creating high quality networking events covering news in Maryland game audio, as well as helping aspiring professionals connect with the right people and have those meaningful conversations to push them forward. But enough about me. Let's move on. I'd love to be able to have a conversation with you all about the industry and what steps you can take to move forward when it comes to game audio. And I know that there's quite a handful of people on this call. And from what I was looking at, those who were registering and in this group, a lot of students and a lot of aspiring professionals that are trying to break in or maybe just starting or working in it and trying to figure out what to do. And I think that there's some interesting information that I want to share with you that provides a little bit of context and a little bit of light on the current state of the industry. As when you look online, you see that it looks like a dumpster fire. And there's lots of layoffs happening, but within all of that, there are some key points to mention here. And the reason why it's important to talk about this is that it's important to understand the shift in demand for roles and that you might be going after and what companies are looking for in potential hires. So there was a study conducted by Brian Schmidt, who's the executive director of Game SoundCon, on audio positions in games. And over the past 4 years, they've conducted 2 separate studies. Him and I think a couple other people conducted a study to really analyze what types of jobs were getting posted and seeing how it compared now in July, as of July, versus 4 years ago. And interestingly enough, a lot of sound design positions, which if you are not an experienced sound designer, you might think sound design involves mostly the creation of the sound and designing the sound for a project or a game, but 80% of those jobs, and I believe it was over 100 different positions that were analyzed, 80% of them required either FMOD or WISE experience, which is a pretty high number if you were thinking that the sound design was mostly the artistic side, but there's an point I'm going to mention here in terms of the technical requirements. 3% of those jobs that were posted were asking for composers or music producers. It was only 3% were artistic roles, and 1% of them were junior level. And there's been a decrease overall in the past 4 years in terms of demand for junior positions, but overall sound design positions have been growing pretty steadily. Technical sound design specifically grew 20% in the past 3 years. And also the salaries were increasing significantly, proving that there is an increased demand for sound designers, even if overall in the state of the industry, at least now as of 2024, it doesn't feel that way. So looking ahead, it's important to know that. Composing, with the focus on game-ready tracks that are adaptive, always has a higher demand. And we're gonna talk about that in a second here. So moving on. Something else that was mentioned in these job posts is soft skills. And soft skills is not something that's always talked about, and they often are implied that you're just kind of expected to know how to do them, but they are not exactly easy, and you do have to learn them somehow, so it's worth mentioning. When you are comparing two individuals with experience, this person on the left that has less experience, now this is an exaggerated example, but somebody who has less experience but is more willing to be collaborative and work with the process of a team that is either has an established process or knows what they want and is looking for somebody to come in and add value, that will get a very different reaction and different result than somebody who has more experience but is coming in and saying, I'm going to do it my way because I know I'm good at what I do, and coming with that ego. And even though they might produce better results in some areas, if you are difficult to work with, it really, really can pretty much remove you from the speed dial list of potential gigs. But some of these soft skills that are required are writing documentation, staying up to date with technological advancements, actually having an interest in what's happening in the industry is pretty important, and often collaborating with outsourcing teams. Sometimes the teams are not all in-house, especially when you're working with contractors that are not on full-time salary with studios that don't necessarily have the budgets. You still have opportunities where you are going to be interacting with individuals on a regular basis. So that's something that you need to know how to do. You're not born with the ability to do that, but it's important to learn how to do that. So just be mindful of that. Next point I want to make is setting realistic expectations. So remember the study, the industry is not what it was just 4 years ago. And when it comes to composing for games, you hear about games like Celeste or Hollow Knight that blow up, and suddenly everybody in the industry knows about the soundtracks, and the composers are having their music played live all around the country, receiving thousands of dollars in royalties, having their names attached to projects as a selling point. That's great, but remember there are 10,000 indie games released on Steam every year. And how many of those can you name off the top of your head? And how many of them do you remember the soundtracks for? A lot of those have really, really good soundtracks that you just never really hear about because the games didn't blow up on Steam. And when it comes to sound design, finding good sound designers is difficult, but not because there aren't talented sound designers. Finding sound designers who understand implementation and are easy to work with is less common. Implementation demands are continuing to rise, especially with the expectation to be able to handle implementation or technical expertise as that becomes the standard, including, which is what's happening in the industry now, especially over the past few months, AI sound design, and not necessarily designing sound effects with AI, but understanding designing environments or sound environments inside of like the Unreal Engine. That is becoming more common. And I know of a couple cases of studios that are already working on that at a large scale on the West Coast. And there is an expectation from the sound designers that are working on those teams that they should be able to get used to using AI technology to actually fill out these environments and create some type of system that allows them to scale that. So that they're not spending all their time working on one environment, but coming up with some type of process where they're able to work at a larger scale more efficiently. But they still, they're not replacing the human sound designer. They're trying to find a way to have that sound designer be able to produce more output in more unique ways and implementation in faster iterations. And the controversial take here is don't be afraid of the technology. I understand that it's controversial to say lean into AI, but there are jobs that will exist in 3 years that don't exist today because of AI, and there are also forms of current jobs that exist now that won't exist 3 years from now. And this has happened since when the internet was invented. This happened during the Renaissance era. Think about cars putting horses out of business. Think about the printing press. It's going to happen many times in our lifetime, and it's never fun when you're in the middle of it. But major shifts and innovations where the outcome is unclear can be pretty scary, but it's also an opportunity to be bold and embrace it in a way that continues to serve the purpose of its applications. And it's your responsibility as an individual, someone who's trying to build a career, to stay up to date with changing technologies and try and see where the industry is going to see how you can add value. Next thing I want to talk about is prioritizing relationships. No one succeeds alone. And you never know when you'll be at the right place at the right time. Be ready for those moments by preparing now. It's not even about knowing the right person. Sometimes you can know all the right people and not end up getting a job you were a perfect fit for. It usually is factors outside of your control. And I've been interviewing for positions where when I didn't get the position, I would because I knew several employees at the companies, I would even ask the CEO, like, hey, just be honest with me. What was the reason? And they literally told me like, oh, yeah, you were great, but we hired internally because this, our publisher sent to somebody and said, you have to use this person instead. So they closed the position. Like, it happens. And funny enough, just a couple of days ago, I got a call from a director for a film that I worked on 10 years ago that is now a senior producer at a record label. And he was looking for somebody to handle development on a project, small project, but he thought of me because of how much fun we had working together when he was just starting his entertainment career. And he works mostly in music now, but when it involves film, he's thinking, oh, who do I know? Oh yeah, there's that guy that I worked with 10 years ago and maybe he's available. So it does happen. Also, go to events and meet other composers and sound designers, audio engineers, you name it. There are plenty of composers and sound designers that I met 10 years ago now that are leading some of the largest games and IPs in the world. Back then when I met them, they were literally interns and uncredited composers. Your peers are the next wave of industry-leading artists. And Game SoundCon is happening in October. For somebody early in their career, it's a pretty good event to connect with professionals and have real conversations that will keep you informed about what's happening in the industry from the inside, from people that are working in it, which is really, really important. Is talk to people who are working in the industry and are seeing things that maybe you're not seeing from the outside, and not just what you're seeing on gaming publications like PC Gamer, Kotaku. It's like, talk to people that are actually on the inside. And the main point that I want to make here is really focus on who is around you, not who is ahead of you. And this leads me to my final point. Get connected. An easy way to get started with this if you're just starting out. And even if you're an industry professional that was caught in the collateral damage of layoffs that have been hitting for a while, and you are in the Maryland, DC, Virginia area, go to meetups, go to IGDA meetups. There's MagFest that happens in January, big Game SoundCon, and of course, Game Audio Maryland, which is what I'm running. And Game Audio Maryland meetups happen every few months. If you're looking for something specifically in audio, we are doing some virtual meetups with speakers specifically to game audio in the coming months, especially next year. But for now, the best way you can stay in the loop is to join our mailing list. It takes 30 seconds to sign up. Google form, very quick to fill out. But we do have an event coming up very shortly, and I won't spoil it, but I will say that if you are interested in game audio and furthering your career in audio for games, I highly recommend that you attend. It will be in Baltimore, so that'll be a great chance to meet some industry professionals and also get some really, really good insights from those inside the industry. And with that being said, thank you so much. And I'm really glad that I was able to come and speak to you all. And I'm looking forward to getting to know you all better. And I hope to see every one of you in person one day. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for the Discord claps. That is the funniest thing I've seen all day. And that is my first time receiving Discord claps, which I can feel all the human emotion through it.
I was gonna say, Andre. So this is Rishi here. As somebody who like makes music independently, but maybe doesn't have the like is more of a composer, but doesn't have the skills to necessarily produce the music to be, presented in like a big environment, to have the impact that professional music does when it's part of a theme song or part of like an epic soundscape or something. It can be daunting because if you go on a websites like Artlist or something that have multiple sound samples that are already up there for people to download and use for their own purposes, those all sound very pro. They all sound like professionally engineered for the most part. So you can tell that those people aren't just composers. They also have the resources to get their sound sounding big. So I feel like for somebody to try to do that themselves who maybe isn't as big on the audio engineering side, it's going to be some money up front for them to work with somebody who is good enough to get it polished enough to maybe pitch their idea for a theme song or a battle scene or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on if you what the outcome is that you're really trying to achieve. Are you trying to are you speaking more in terms of getting work that is related to writing music for games, or finding the opportunity to like showcase those skills? Like, can you elaborate more on what the outcome is, desired outcome?
I think Yeah, I think more the latter, like sort of pitching clips or samples of your work for somebody to be browsing a website like Artlist, somebody who's putting together, music or audio for a game or whatever project, and say, "Hey, this sounds really good. I want to take this and implement it straight away, as is, into my song, or into my project." For somebody to do that with your work, you have to already get it to a pretty polished state.
So that that doesn't happen at every level in the industry. So there is Gamescape Audio, which is a company in LA that actually does this professionally. I've created music for them in the past. They are specializing in creating game ready audio that is properly formatted, mixed, mastered, and packaged up in a way that allows it to be added to game engines like pretty quickly. And that is a unique service that really isn't offered by many companies, if any other companies, at least from what I've seen. But typically, if you are trying to create music that is already prepackaged for a game, you're implying that there will be your desired outcome is multiple studios or multiple developers being able to add your music to their game, so your soundtrack will appear in multiple games, right? Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah, essentially, because otherwise, how are you supposed to advertise your work?
Well, it depends if you're advertising your work or you're advertising your skill set, right? Because if you're advertising your ability to be able to create game ready audio, that is different than advertising a skill set that, hey, I can compose for video games. Because there is an overlap
Nice.
there where if you want to show your ability to compose for games or even understand the technical side, the music doesn't have to be the highest quality if you can showcase a deep understanding of how it actually works in a game, right? Because there's a lot of composers, like one of the slides I was saying is like, hey, all these people are saying I can write music for your game. And then there's the one guy off to the side saying, well, I can make music for your game, but yeah, it might not sound as good as theirs, but I know the technical side. I can actually put it in your game and make it work and make it be dynamic and have the different states transition between each other. And like, that's a very valuable skill. And there's a demand increasing for that. And there's less demand for just somebody that can write music. And in your case, if you're trying to get work as a composer, all my friends that are working now in the industry that are doing music for games, especially a few of my friends, not naming any names, but they're now working as lead composers on games that are AAA, but they started as music assistants or assistants for other composers that were working on like expansion packs for video games. And they were very, very heavy focused on the technical side, and they were doing the composition work, but that was not the skill set that made them really valuable or got them the job. It was their ability to actually work at a technical level and help implement and enhance what the main composer was doing. So I think it's really important for you to have a clear understanding of what it is that you would want to do and the type of job that you're actually trying to get in audio. Because my whole point about building up a skill set that can scale and that is valuable means understanding the demand of what a studio is actually trying to find. Because what is for certain is that maybe 10 years ago, you could still have gotten hired as just a composer. But right now, it's very, very rare that somebody is getting hired as a composer, if at all, that's just a composer and doesn't understand the actual technical side of it.
Okay, yeah, and that's what I'm saying. I mean, regardless of how good the composition is, you got to have some understanding of the technical side to get it to, you know, I guess, a production level. All right, well, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've got something I'm a little curious about. You talked about AI being a disruptive force and how that there's a lot of focus in getting people trained in on those tools. But since it is such a transitional period, like you mentioned how on the one hand AI could make old tools obsolete, but on the other hand, things that you could be training on for AI now may not necessarily cross over and may themselves become obsolete from, a different direction the industry might go. Like for example, like when, it was what, Blu-rays versus HDV formats, someone who put all of their work into maybe the losing format might not have the same success as someone who had the Blu-ray, which ended up winning, but neither side knew what was going to win at the time. So when it comes to those developing AI related skills, is there anything in particular that like you think is more like, what in your opinion is the place to focus, and what are the places that are like very overhyped but still unsettled whether or not that's going to be how things are done, if that makes sense?
It's difficult to predict, especially because I'm not working at a AAA studio right now. The thing about established studios, is they have a process that already exists and that's defined, and they have their team that has their defined process. Nobody is looking to completely redefine their process. Like, nobody that's actually doing the work is trying to be like, okay, I want to completely restart and relearn everything now that there's this new technology changing the way that I do everything I know and love in games. So the actual time it takes for the adaption to happen is not a quick process, but I believe it's a process that is going to accelerate by force based off of the demand of studios or publishers or larger companies that are trying to implement this technology. You have companies right now like EA that have come out and said, hey, we are 100% utilizing this to create the biggest battlefield ever, harnessing AI technology to allow us to be able to scale up within our budgets and to be able to do more than we ever could before. And what that necessarily means, we don't know, but while that's not necessarily on the audio side specific, it is setting the precedent that is okay at a large level, and that we're going to see that trickle down into less defined processes, like from indie studios. Like a lot of indie developers don't have some defined process, and they're trying to figure out, okay, how am I gonna do this, and what is my process going to be? What tools am I going to use? But part of my answer to your question is, and I know you didn't ask what tool specifically, but I should emphasize, don't focus on the specific tools, focus on the application of the tools. And I believe, even though the industry is still very, very early in its infancy with AI and everything that's being hyped right now and saying, oh my gosh, this is a disruptor and now everything's going to be AI generated models. And it's like, no, slow down. Those processes are not going to change soon. Maybe AI UV mapping and rigging and more intelligent, optimized game ready models. Yeah, that's happening better and better every few months. We're getting really, really great improvements. On the audio side, when it comes to sound design, like the actual creation of the sound, building a skill set in like being a Foley artist, like recording artist, there's still value in that, because there's a demand for that, and there's going to be a demand for a while. But it's not just the recording. It's okay, here's the recording that I did. Let's say I just recorded 10 hours of sound effects, a crazy amount of variety. A studio might want you to say, okay, we want you to provide the amount of sound design output that would be expected from 3 different people over the course of like 3 months, but we want you to do it in a month, or we want you to do it in 3 weeks. And what you might need to do is take the sounds that you've recorded already and find a way to create variations using AI. Maybe you're recording samples and then mixing those samples together. I mean, like actually combining those samples, or using AI to create your own original variations of it that you might not do yourself. So like you create 3 to 5 to 10 different sounds, and then AI will create 500 variations of those sounds. Maybe those are environment sounds, and then you want to put those in an environment, and then now you just designed the entire ambient environment for a planet in a video game, and you did that by being very intentional about the way that you crafted your sounds in a way that allowed them to expand and scale. Instead of you actually doing it manually, finding a way to understand that the output that is expected of you is going to be increasing every year. And with AI, you are going to be expected to do more. Finding a way to make your process more efficient is where your focus should lie. So that's really, in summary, my long answer and cut short is really find a way to scale your process. Find a way to do what you do as a sound designer and scale it, do it faster, do it more efficient, so that you're able to do more as the demand increases. Because the human element is still going to be there, but the actual demand for creating every single sound individually and recording, you might not have to do as much of that, but you should absolutely know how it works. You should absolutely find out how that process works, understand from start to finish, so that you have that knowledge to allow you to be able to scale on it. Like, you got to learn how to walk before you can run. But with AI, it's like, okay, we want to fly, but we haven't even built the engine yet, or the engine is still being built. And it's like, as you're flying, you're upgrading the engine and trying to fix it as you go. And it's like, okay, take a step back, but understand where you're going and prepare that way. A specific example with what's happening in in Unreal, from what I've seen, is there is a demand for being able to, and there are tools that are being built right now that are specifically designed to do this in Unreal Engine, is taking a list of sound effects that you've created and finding a way to populate an environment automatically using the sounds that you have designed and organized and prepped in a clever way, saying like, okay, these are the types of sounds that would come from rustling through the bushes. These are the sounds that you would get when you're walking through this canyon. How does it actually affect the sound in the environment? How does it echo differently? What does the wind sound like when you pass through this doorway? And that type of automated process is starting to become more refined, but the purpose of that is not to replace the sound designer, but to allow them to iterate much faster. So instead of them spending a few hours trying to build out an environment, they can build out an environment in 5 minutes and then spend the next few hours trying to fine tune and polish and focus on areas that are less tedious or focus on more of the creative aspects of that. So you're not necessarily saving time, it's just making your process more efficient. And that's something that a lot of AI hype tends to ignore, is that it's not necessarily speeding things up. It's more allowing you to get started quicker and realize your visions and your ideas a lot faster so that you can then refine. Also, I'm happy to just chat individually if anybody wants to DM me afterwards and not talk in front of the group. Always happy to chat. I'm very easy to get a hold of and very easy to connect with. So happy to talk anytime if there's any types of topics or things that you might not want to say in front of a group. I get that. So that usually tends to happen.
Hey, how's it going? I think I did actually just have like one small question. Like, what's the difference between, and I know a lot of games are moving kind of away from like just licensing music, but do you think like there's a big difference between like just like making a bunch of songs or a bunch of beats and then just licensing them out versus getting hired as a composer specifically for a project?
Licensing right now is in trouble. A lot of licensed music, because of Suno and Udio being able to generate music that's like licensable music in seconds, the whole licensing industry is being affected right now, where the demand for original music is dropping because it's just so much faster and easier to create high quality music. Now, we're not there yet as of today. You can create pretty good music. You still need to do quite a bit of work to make it sound good. And yes, there is the issue with the music being generated from other composers' original works. So there's a lot of controversy around that. But the way that happens now is not the way that it's going to be happening in the near future. So even just a year from now, I would expect the AI generated music and like licensable music to be pretty much flawless. We're seeing this with the stock photo industry, like Adobe stock photo, Shutterstock. I mean, that the industry is completely collapsing, like completely, because there's no reason to pay for stock photos when you can generate one in Midjourney for 2 cents. And that's, while we have that already in a visual sense, moving towards audio, we're not quite there yet, but it's the same direction that it's going, where for a lot of companies, licensing music will not really be a part of the process when they can create something original. And while I don't necessarily agree that that is the best route to take, that is the reality, that it is so affordable. You know, licensing a track can cost $75, $150, $300, and you can spend a few pennies generating something original. A lot of developers and a lot of studios that don't necessarily have those budgets are going to take advantage of that. Just like we have the asset store. right? It's like, oh, we go to the asset store and we go to the Unreal Marketplace because we want to save money, save time. Like, why would we do this? You know, why would we do this originally? License song, $79? Yes, but usually not the full rights, not the full commercial rights to it. But there's different tiers. But from what I've seen, you know, you have, like, you can use it in a certain form. Like, oh, you can use it in a YouTube video, but if you want to use it in a video game, I know there's I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but I would not recommend that the time spent creating licensable music. I would recommend being able to create that music, but focusing more on the technical aspects of it. So finding a way to take that track and making it game ready. Like finding a way to actually break apart the stems, have different states that would work in different states within a game, because that is a great gateway into actually being able to implement that audio or understanding how the audio implementation works.
All right, awesome. Thank you.
My concern with licensed music is copyright strikes. If I or a player streams my game on YouTube, yes, this has happened to me before. This is an issue that is actually a very, very big topic, because it's so funny, because in the music industry, you hear songs like Sabrina Carpenter just released her Espresso song, right? And there is the whole controversy around that's a licensed track, right? Like a big portion, the actual hook of that song was purchased for, I don't remember how much it was, like maybe $30-$40. That's crazy, right? And that means that the producer gets no royalties from that whatsoever. It doesn't even get a producer credit. And all the time in the industry, there are songs that are copying each other that sound really similar or borrowing ideas. It's just not so one-to-one because they didn't license it, or it was done in the particular manner that would warrant that type of reaction or warrant that type of legal, what's the word I'm trying to think of? I guess legal status. And with licensing tracks, I think the issues that we have right now are not necessarily going to remain, but I think it's going to be a very different type of problem that we're trying to solve. Because if you are, which is happening already with AI generated music, these tracks are being generated, and then there are composers and producers coming out and saying, hey, you generated that track on Suno, that's my riff, like that's my sample. And I know composers personally that have already had that happen to them, where they said, I just generated a track and my own piece of music was in the track I just generated. Like, I know that because that's my distinct sound. And that's where the lawsuit was coming from. But as this gets more and more complex, the nuance with licensing tracks and like copyright strikes and the whole YouTube policy around it, like all of that is not going to be applicable. It's going to have to be completely redone, because there is no good way to really police it or to be able to actually manage and track that. It's going to be happening at a rate that is so fast and growing so fast at an unmanageable level that it's going to have to get really bad before it gets better. But when it comes to licensing and copyright issues on YouTube, I honestly think that entire process is going to be have to be wiped clean and replaced with something that's much more much more realistic in addressing some of the modern concerns with the nuances with licensing, and especially when you start seeing tracks that are getting 1 billion streams on Spotify that are using AI generated components. Like, imagine how complicated that gets now. So, do you happen to know what the state of those issues are in the courts right now? I know that there is an ongoing battle with Suno and other music generating platforms, but personally, I don't think that there is really going to be a resolution anytime soon, because there isn't an incentive for it to happen. Yeah, so what I'm saying is the issues are still going. but I don't think they're going to get resolved anytime soon because there isn't really an incentive for it to happen. I think it's still changing fast enough that any type of resolution or measures that are put in place with AI generated audio, I think there's going to be either a way around it or some type of irrelevancy that comes from the fact that companies like Spotify are producing their own music in-house, and having their own processes for handling AI generated audio. And if somebody tries to sue another music producer for releasing works that contain their samples, I don't think it's going to be so straightforward. And even by the time that these legal cases resolve, the situations might evolve so much that it's now not necessarily irrelevant, but that there will be some type of new advancement in the technology that then changes the way that we even have to approach it. And I think what's actually been happening for a couple of years now is even within the metadata of tracks, the way that we track the ID for music and how they're actually being mapped to producers and handling royalties in terms of somebody ripping a track or remixing it. That's been evolving over time, and it was even before the whole AI craze. So it's happening slowly, but I think this is going to be an ongoing battle for a long time until eventually it becomes so widespread and accepted within the industry that we more, as an industry, adapt to a new norm. You know, as much as that might not sound so optimistic, I do think that's the reality of how fast these things move. How can you, as the developer that will be held responsible, mitigate the risks of AI and defining originality when generating music? How is that responsibility defined right now? It seems the definition of original can shift, and it's even possible that AI companies will not share information that is essential in determining the originality of the track. Yes, Bernadette, this is part of the issue that we're experiencing now, where there isn't a clear definition, and originality is one of those terms that is being redefined. You know, and it's not even just in audio. When it comes to like Midjourney and the controversy around Midjourney, there was a issue with artists' signatures appearing on generated images, and we're really at a point where the original works, while they're being inspired by original works, the outputs are now almost impossible to map to an original artist. Does that mean that the work that was used to inspire it is still plagiarism? Is it still stealing? That's the same question that is being asked right now in audio. The difference is in audio, I think it's a little bit easier to tell when something is stolen because we can hear it, and it's a little bit harder to hide, but it happens all the time in the industry, and there's riffs that are being stolen. You know, almost every single melody that can ever be made, any combination has been done already. So all the time we're hearing songs that sound just like each other. And does that mean they're not original? You know, is any song original? And I think that it's kind of getting conflated between the two, because originality with AI, like what's the difference between creating something through AI and then just ripping off another song by creating the same melody and changing one note? You know, it's still plagiarism to some degree. But with AI generated audio, how different does it have to be until it's no longer plagiarism? Like, it's not just changing the pitch. How much does the sound have to be synthesized? If it's the exact same melody, but you swap it out with a different instrument, is it still plagiarism because you were using the melody from another track? You know, not everybody agrees on this. And I think that's where it becomes so difficult to actually define how we handle policing it, or even handling copyright strikes. This is why I was saying that on YouTube, it has to be completely rebuilt, because there is no black and white answer to this anymore. Sorry, Mr. Talk. Did you talk about professional organizations such as ASCAP? Should indie audio people join them? If so, when? I didn't talk about the organizations. While I am a part of ASCAP, there's also BMI. But I personally don't really recommend somebody joining them too early. I think that the point in which you should join ASCAP or BMI is at the point in which you have your music out there in a way that you could collect royalties. If you, because that's really what it's for. You get those royalty checks because you know that your game soundtrack is out there, it's being licensed, or it's appearing in some live event, and you don't know where it's approaching, but you get that notification and that paycheck that arrives 3 months later saying, hey, your song played on this event or was played by this orchestra in Minnesota, and that's when it really becomes relevant. But while it's fun to join one, ASCAP is more for film. BMI is more just music focused. So I know a lot of composers that are in one or another. It doesn't really matter which one you choose. They are both good, except just you don't have to join in to be taken seriously until you are at a point where you're working on projects that would actually require it. So if you get to that point where you are required to be part of either ASCAP or BMI, then good for you. Sometimes the lawsuits, at least from what I've seen, are not there to necessarily come to a resolution. They're more for the media, more for the marketing side, and more politics than anything. It's more to slow down or feed specific agendas for certain companies that are either funding these AI-generated companies or have a financial incentive against it. And a lot of times it's not for the artist. And while it's important for artists, it's also important to recognize who is actually filing these lawsuits and what the incentive is for them to win the lawsuit. But I do think a lot of what's happening right now is more slowing it down and asking the right questions, the right legal questions. But it's really just buying time before a lot of these large companies are able to find a way around it and a way around the legal system, because that's really what's going to happen. You're not going to be able to stop AI. It's just how is it going to manifest itself actually in our everyday life. It may help to define AI. So there's a difference between program that takes a sound effect. Sound effect means between a person of wind blowing and implements the environment filters, and volume appropriate for the generation and generating songs. Yeah, it's a good point, Nick. Yeah, it's funny because AI in games, right? Like I did AI in games, and then anytime I say, oh, I'm doing something AI outside of games, it's like, oh, that means the same thing to anybody that is not actually working in AI in games, because artificial intelligence in gaming has been around for a long time. It just has nothing to do with generative AI. So I should be more specific. It's a good point. Yeah, we're talking about generative AI, which is different than the AI inside of a game engine that would be able to intelligently and intuitively find a way to build out your environment, to design the sound for an environment using the actual files that you created, maybe or maybe not with AI. I'm honestly somewhat shocked companies aren't being forced to show what their training data is. Yeah, there was a whole thing about this with OpenAI and stability, being able to be transparent about where they're getting their data from and how the data is how the training, what data is being used to train their models. And this is a very controversial point because a lot of these companies are not transparent, because we know that it's being trained with YouTube videos. So Sora is being trained with YouTube videos. So if you post a video on YouTube, it's very likely that that video was being trained. Even gameplay videos, like if you go into Sora and then you were trying to generate a Minecraft video, it would be looking super photorealistic. And you're like, wow, how does that look exactly like Minecraft? Because it was using inspiration from YouTube Minecraft Let's Play videos. I believe Valve is at least requiring companies to prove that they have the rights to the content if they're made with generative AI. Yes. This is similar to of the policing around like blockchain technology and saying, hey, we don't want to have anything to do with this legal gray area because it also protects them as an organization. So I'm glad that there are companies that are having you admit that you're using generative AI, especially also in the asset store. Unity has been very careful about this with assets that are using any type of AI integration. I know, Tony, you know all about that. With I think you guys released the OpenAI expansion, so I'm sure you could even speak on that. This makes a lot of sense because the technology is interesting. Yeah. Thank you, Tony. This makes a lot of sense because the technology is interesting, but a lot of the companies circumvent the entire rights process because it seems they don't care. Yeah, this is going to be an ongoing issue for a while. When it comes down to it, as pessimistic as it can sound, finding a way to save money and to cut costs is always a priority for any company, but becoming more efficient can be a priority, but the difference lies in your ability to value the people within your organization. So there's a line, there's a fine line that you have to walk to find that balance. But to be honest, that line seems to be moving, and we're in a room and the lights are off and it's dark and I can't see where the line is because it's changing so much because of new technology that is addressing a new area of the industry. So more questions are being asked in different parts of the industry every single month. And this is a new challenge that every area of the industry is trying to address and find answers to and figure out how do they want to walk that line and how do they want to manage that within their own organization. And of course, you'll see this first at AAA companies because they have the most to lose because they have the most money on the line. Yeah, we all settled into asking questions here instead of asking through the mic. Yeah, I was wondering that earlier. How do we safely embrace and leverage generative AI? What's the path to success here? Man, that is opening Pandora's box, Alan. So, I am no expert in AI, but I have to preface that saying that I'm not an expert in AI, but I am very, very fascinated and have spent a significant amount of time playing around with generative AI tools and APIs just to experiment and understand the limitations. And that has really opened my eyes to how much fluff is out there and how much these companies are faking it. There are a lot of great tools out there, and when used together in very specific ways and very, very difficult to combine ways, it's a very challenging field. There are some very impressive things that you can do with tools that exist now, especially open source tools that you can combine and create amazing work, like combining stability with comfy UI, with a little sprinkle in a little bit of runway in there with some mid-journey images as inspiration, and you can get some pretty crazy visuals with some nice VFX. But in general, generative AI is quite limited because there are individual companies trying to solve very specific problems. And we're not at a point where those basic foundational problems are solved yet that allows us to be able to build on them and do absolutely mind-blowing things very easily. Like we're still in the Windows 95 stage. Like we are not at a point where we are able to run game engines on a Windows machine. Like we're still trying to define this technology. And there are billions of dollars, and probably billions of dollars more than there should be, of going into research for this technology for it to evolve. And what we're seeing is there are results, and there's also a lot of failure. And when the dust settles, there are going to be some really clear indicators for the direction that the the whole generative AI industry is going to go, and where the priorities in terms of the funding are going to be for the near future, and also the way that consumers and the everyday consumers are going to be able to utilize it for their own businesses. And it's not just through the art side, but it's like, think about the internet and how we use the internet now, but the internet in the mid 2000s, while it was already booming and there were lots and lots of companies trying to find ways to utilize it, the way that we use the internet today and the way that people can make livings off of the internet today were not possible 20 years ago. Like, it just was not possible. And that's not because the ideas weren't there and society didn't have great ideas. It just, the technology was not there. We didn't have the infrastructure for it to happen. So we are right now in the process of building that infrastructure. Now, how do we leverage generative AI now? Well, again, that's going to completely change. Right now it's going to change every month or so. It seems like it's changing. But what I was saying earlier in the talk was just keep an eye out on the advancements that are happening. Keep an eye on the patterns, try and watch the patterns of where the money is being spent, into what type of research, what processes are trying to be affected or improved or completely rebuilt using generative AI. If they are relevant to your field of work, figure out, okay, how can I use that research? How can I use these tools to improve my process? Because at least if I understand how these tools work and I understand the limitations of generative AI, I will be able to understand how to better utilize it in the future as it continues to evolve. Because a lot of people use ChatGPT without having any idea of how ChatGPT actually works. And you see this all the time on social media, like TikTok videos or people talking about ChatGPT said this and it's a sentient being. And it's like, no, it's not. It's completely fooling you. It's trained to talk this way, but it's using a limited data set. And it's a very, very large data set, but it's limited. And if you actually understand how it works and you apply that same level of thinking to generative AI, and even when it comes to audio generation and music, AI generated music, it will help you understand better how to utilize technology as it develops. And you might be able to actually jump in way faster. Like, think about if you use the Unity engine or use Unreal Engine for years, and then a new engine comes out and then you try using it and suddenly you're able to use it quickly. Is that just because you're a genius, or is it because maybe you're a genius, but maybe it's because you already have experience using technology that was similar enough that you were able to understand how it works at a deeper level, and you understand how it flows. You understand how to make that engine work and do what you need it to do. So you can apply that to new tools. And these new tools are designed to be user-friendly, and nobody's trying to make a crappy product. So they're building off of the experience and the tools that come before it. And that's the same thing that's happening in AI. We're just really, really early. All right, Matthew, on a different note, I know for lighting, you can calculate how surfaces reflect light, creating a different illumination in a scene, but I am curious, is there something similar to that with respect to sound being reflected around an environment? I don't think we're at a point yet where that really exists. I've seen it in terms of AI you're talking about, or is this outside of like WISE or FMOD, or are you talking about specifically in regards to having AI like automatically generate that? Because I don't think we're at a point yet where we can do that well. At least I haven't seen it. Is it possible for a new composer or sound engineer to make a living working on indie games, or is the space wholly dominated by established older audio pros? If not, if so, how? If not, what paths do you recommend? Yeah, so there's always space for new talent. And like I was saying earlier in the presentation, focus on who's around you, not ahead of you. There's a lot that you can learn from older audio pros, but we are entering an era where generative AI content is going to become much more common. And does that mean that humans are not going to be needed because you can do everything with AI? No. But when it comes to sound engineers, and we did talk about this earlier, Tony. I had a slide on this, but when it comes to sound engineering, yeah, you can definitely make a living working on games. When it comes to indie games and yourself, don't necessarily think that if you're just trying to make games yourself, the chances of you being able to live that indie dream and be able to just make games on your own and release them and get a bunch of sales and be able to live off of that solo, that's a lot more difficult to do. It does happen, but those cases are few and far between. But if you're able to build up the skill sets that are what these companies are looking for and what's in demand, then yes, there's definitely a shot. But just remember from my earlier point, for everybody that was here, junior positions are non-existent. They just don't really exist anymore. I also see a lot of companies don't even have internships anymore. There's only a few. I know Firaxis does internships, but overall, it's a lot more rare. So companies are not looking for entry-level experience or entry-level understandings. They want to have experience on their team. They want to be able to bring that level of value to their team that is going to help take their game to new heights. And the way that you're going to get that experience without actually getting the jobs or being able to find the opportunity to do it is, you're learning it on your own, being able to actually practice those skills. Join game jams, do it for game jams. I've actually gotten jobs in games just from projects that I've done at game jams before. At the Micah Showcase, actually, I was offered a job after somebody there saw my UI work. So it happens, but you need to be focused on building up skill sets that are in demand, because something that's important to remember as an indie developer, nobody wants to hire a generalist because there's no need. Everybody should be specialized in something, because if you are a studio that has a certain need that you need to fill, especially when it comes to something technical, they want somebody that is really, really good at that technical thing. If you're really, really good at that technical thing, then that will really set you apart from being somebody who's kind of good at that technical thing, but can also do a little bit of design, and maybe also is a good game designer, and maybe can do QA, and maybe understands color theory. It's like that stuff, nobody really cares. So just understand that you have to be intentional about what you're trying to learn if you want to be able to find a career doing it when it comes to sound. Apart from generative AI, are there other new untapped areas of audio that are being explored for games? Actually, what's happening outside of games. So I have some friends that I'm seeing this happen with, but the skill sets that you would learn to work with in games are applicable outside of games, especially if you understand audio within physical environments, and being able to understand how audio works in a environment in like a 3D space, being able to translate that outside of audio is a very interesting and valuable skill that has been rising in demand, at least from what I've seen and what I've been hearing. And the types of projects that I'm seeing are getting funded for creating and designing sounds for actual physical environments or physical attractions. Like if you go to amusement parks, or you're going to like arenas, sports arenas, like things like this are being built more and invested in more than they were 10 years ago. And a lot of these designers that are working on these projects come from the game industry. So I am seeing more of a growth in that, but specifically in games, I can't say that I've seen anything major. What do you see as the ideal utilization of AI that uses it to its full potential while not harming those who have taken time to master skills these generative AI learn from and replicate? This is an ongoing debate and conversation where I think it really, really matters your perspective on if you think AI is harmful or not. Utilization of AI is interesting because the way that we are trying to understand generative AI is changing very rapidly. And we're still at a point this year, and it might be different next year, but we're still at a point where it's changing fast enough that it's hard to understand exactly what areas are going to be affected. It's easier to assume all areas are going to be effective. And personally, I think looking at it in the way that it's harming those who have taken time to master the skills, I think it's more of those who have taken the time to master the skills already have an advantage in understanding the process at such a deep level that they can actually utilize AI faster than those who are just joining, right? Because the wisdom and experience that it takes to fine tune that human level touch that makes the difference between okay audio and world-class audio, award-winning audio, it's like the last 10%, you know? And I think that there's actually an advantage to those who have already been doing it for a while. But like I was saying earlier, there are forms of these jobs that don't exist now that are going to exist in 3 years, and vice versa. Some of them that exist now are going to disappear in the next 3 years. And I think that that's really important context to keep in mind, because if you are trying to learn how to utilize generative AI, if you are an experienced individual and you are good at what you do and you understand the process of sound design, you will be able to utilize it in a way that brings value to a company. And you are more likely to be able to find intuitive ways to introduce it to your process and use it in a way that's more efficient than somebody that's maybe trying to just break in and might not understand how it all really works yet, because they're still trying to understand the foundation. I think that's going to continue to evolve, but I don't think it's necessarily going to be a threat to experts in the field, because those experts in the field are likely going to be working on projects that are demanding different requirements based off of what's possible with AI and whatever tools become the new norm. I don't even know if those tools really exist yet. A lot of them are still being built. So at least this year, that's not going to happen. Next year, possibly, maybe a couple years from now is when we'll really see that actually be utilized, especially when you start seeing some of the larger companies like EA actually taking this on and forcing this into their studios. I don't think that it's going to be necessarily like replacing some of the more experienced designers. I think it's going to change the types of roles that they have to do, and it will change the type of jobs that they have. But skilled workers and experienced workers, especially in this field, will have a much easier time finding work than somebody who's just trying to start out, if it's in specifically regards to generative AI. And maybe that's the wrong take, but at least from what I've seen and how fast studios are adopting this technology, I don't see it really being a threat in the near future, but more of time to adapt will be there.
I think that's a pretty positive note to end on there, unless you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share, Andre.
I really appreciate everybody asking some good questions and having a good discussion here. This is, it's not an easy topic, and it's not an easy time that we're going through right now as an industry. But just remember, not every year is going to be like this. There are good years in the industry. There are bad years in the industry. And for you, if you're just trying to break in, have some hope. Games are not going anywhere. Games are just going to continue evolving. Just pay attention to how it's evolving. And it's your responsibility to keep an eye on how you can bring value to these studios. Just pay attention to what they're looking for and continue doing what you love.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Andre. I think this was a really popular talk. I think you got the most questions out of anyone who's given a talk here. So thank you again for doing this.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Tony, for inviting me and having me here. This is super fun. All of you, please, I'm going to try, I have recorded all the names here. I'm going to try and connect with all of you. Would love to connect anyway outside of here. Again, if you want to get connected with the community, please join us at our next Game Audio Maryland event in person. It's going to be really fun and a great opportunity to talk to some really experienced individuals. So hope to see you all there.